Yeah, so it's going live. Okay, so we're now just officially recording for whatever that's worth, and then I'm going to mute myself as well, and Jasmine, you can go ahead and do the intro.
Awesome. All right, this is February 4th, 2016, and we are interviewing Ramnath, the author of R charts, HTML widgets, and plenty of other R packages, and we're going to be talking about his views and ideas about R and JavaScript and Shiny. So really excited to have Ramnath, and we're going to kick off the interview asking some questions a little bit about him.
Yeah, so
Thanks, Jasmine.
I think for a first question, Ramnath, it'd be great just to get some background about yourself, sort of your career. I know that you used to be at McGill, I think, getting that right, and now you're at Alteryx, and so just a little bit about your own career path and how that's impacted your development of R packages.
Yep. So my career path has been interesting. I started off, my undergrad was in mechanical engineering, and then I dabbled in the world of consulting for a couple of years, which got me very interested in supply chains. So that led me to go for a PhD, and then that's how I got to McGill. And while at McGill, I was teaching statistics for undergraduates, and it was at that time that I started really feeling the need for essentially something more interactive that I could do with R. Essentially, there were all these really cool tools to do static things, and I was drawn towards more interactive stuff, especially for my teaching. And so a lot of my R package development started off while I was teaching. So in my teaching semester, my first project was Slidify, which was essentially a tool, a package that would allow you to kind of create interactive Markdown documents, make slides out of R Markdown documents, and then one thing led to another, and then before I knew it, I really got sucked into the wonderful world at the intersection of R and JavaScript, and that's how I started writing a whole bunch of packages. And I was at McGill till around 2014, at which point I had this opportunity to start work for Alteryx. Alteryx is involved in the big data analytics space, and essentially gave me the opportunity to work there as a data scientist, where I could do my open source development of these R packages, and at the same time put interactive visualizations to good use in the product as well. And so that's what I do currently. So that's my career in like a really short in a short way.
Sorry. Great. So I guess my next question is a little bit about sort of just generally, and maybe you can expand upon this more than you just did, if that's okay. Would you just tell us a little bit more about what you do for Alteryx now that you're there, as well as I'm curious. You've made this transition from this academic job, and now you're working at Alteryx, and I'm curious how that sort of impacted your time and the incentives that you have to develop R packages. Do you have more incentives and more time now, or do you feel like demands of your job take away from that, and just sort of how that's impacted your development?
So that's a good question. In fact, one of the reasons I made this switch was because I wanted to spend more time doing R package development in these areas. And as an academic, you have the flexibility, but then there is the added pressure of publishing and teaching, which I believe was kind of putting a lot of pressure on me. And so it was like almost living two jobs at the same time when I was teaching. So at Alteryx, I'm part of a very small data science group, and our mandate is to kind of bring about the best of our packages that do machine learning into the product, so that our end users, who are traditionally more, I would say, come from a non-coding background, can make use of these R packages for doing interesting analytics. And in particular, my role, I lead the efforts on interactive visualizations. Essentially, idea being you want our users to be able to create interactive visualization outputs from predictive analytics algorithms without really having to touch upon a lot of code. So it ties in really well with a lot of the development I do these days. For example, HTML widgets is a package that I put together with Kenton Russell and folks at our studio that essentially allows you to author interactive visualizations. I use the package a lot myself to develop visualization packages, and essentially I use it a lot in my current work. And essentially a lot of the visualizations that are there in the product make heavy use of HTML widgets. And I believe the incentives are very aligned because from my perspective, developing HTML widgets exposed it to the outside world. More people work, contribute widgets, and now suddenly I can use like 50 plus widgets that other people have developed, and I can then again use that in the product. So I think this is a good way that open source and proprietary products can play well with each other because development needs kind of are aligned in a very nice way. So so what I'm trying to say here is that I think my current job allows me to align my interests very well, and in fact a lot of the development I do is sort of benefiting both what I'm doing at work here and also able to contribute back to the open source world. In terms of flexibilities, I mean, I have a lot of flexibility in terms of the work I do. So the one difference I find being in the corporate world versus academia is I think the whole sense of deadlines changes a little bit. So long term in academia is maybe 2-3 years. So you could sit and perfect the paper for a couple of years before you decide to publish it. Whereas in the corporate world, it's usually an order of, long term usually is the next release, right? Product-based company, so 6 months. But I think it's worked well because it forces you to kind of quickly do an 80-20 and say, hey, okay, this is, I need to put something out in 6 months. This essentially is a high quality stuff I can put out, and then worry about embellishments and enhancements at a later stage. So net, I think I'm really enjoying my current role. It's giving me the best of both worlds in terms of flexibility at developing what I want, but at the same time being able to put the stuff I build out in front of more people, both open source and customers that we have.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it just sort of, I'm going to go a little bit off script here with a question, and I want to sort of follow up this thread here of development of packages in industry versus academia. So R, of course, has traditionally been the language of, academic statistics and academic science, and it's definitely seen this pretty big rise in private industry. Recently, lots of companies use it as their main engine for doing analytics. And part of a consequence of that is there's a certain amount of poaching of talent, like yourself. Not that I would lump myself into the same category as you, but I also sort of left academia to do a lot of work in R day-to-day in my job here. And I guess my question is, do you feel like this shift of who's contributing back to R is going to have a change on the package ecosystem? So traditionally, you've got a lot of academics contributing these packages, but there's not quite the same incentives for creating software in academia as there are in industry. So clearly yours is a position where the kinds of contributions that you're able to make back to the R community are also rewarded at your job in a way that is probably greater than you would see when you were McGill, right? And so I guess my question is, as the type of person or the job that people have as they contribute back to CRAN, do you think that's a good change, or do you think it's changing at all, or is it just different? And what are some of your thoughts about that?
So that's a great question. I think my answer to that question is first I think it's a good thing that R is being used a lot out in the industry, because that naturally creates good quality things, because packages are being used every day, right? So anything that any issues, any bugs, they're kind of coming to the fore. So I think that's one. Second, I think one huge difference between how packages are used. Packages are used in two ways in the industry, in my opinion. One is essentially when it's used by a data scientist, where you're using it to do interactive analysis, right? And two, in companies that are trying to do products, right, where these packages are being used, but kind of exposing to the user in a different kind of environment. So I think in both cases, I think it benefits both open source and the commercial world. The 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 one so I mean I'm probably going to stop here because I think there is tremendous amount of benefit, and yeah, we could get into more details based on not really sure which direction I want to head with this. So
Jasmine, do you want to ask the last question?
Sure. Can I steal your number 3 question? All right, awesome. So, Ramnath, that's a really interesting position you were taking and from Ted's question about the academic development versus an industry development and how it's used. And I definitely see that now in sort of I think the scope of where R is going as far as also its potential. And so also, could you, give us an idea about, like, I guess your opinion about the larger R and JavaScript ecosystem, and how do the packages that you've developed that are interactive, how do they fit within maybe the future vision of where R seems to be going, or how do they work against each other? Are they trying to improve and enhance the aspects of R? Yeah, just your take on that would be great.
So just to clarify the question asked. So the question is essentially how does interaction between R and JavaScript, how is that enhancing the ecosystem of R, or is that the question? I just want to make sure I understand that correctly.
That's probably one aspect of the question. Then also just the complementary or the complementary relationship between R and JavaScript and what you've seen being produced now with interactive visualizations.
Okay, excellent. So, I'm going to try to answer this question in a couple of pieces, right? So first of all, I think R is really great at data manipulation. JavaScript is the language of the web. So I see the interaction between R and JavaScript as a natural way to create applications where you could use the computational power and statistical computation power of R, but make it easily consumable by the end user. Right, and so it's a very natural fit in terms of what was going to happen, and if you look at more traditional languages like Python, they had these web frameworks built in, like Python had Django and a whole bunch of other things. Now R started off as a statistical programming platform, and so lacked a lot of these tools. And essentially, what's happened in the last few years is that an entire ecosystem of tools has spawned. Right? So a couple of good examples I can give you. So Shiny kind of changed the world of R in many ways, made it really easy for people to author web applications with R. And I think, and then that was of course on the server side, and then all these packages doing interactive visualizations now allow people doing R programming to naturally take advantage of the vast ecosystem of JavaScript libraries available, which do these interactive things. So I think net, I see this as a really healthy development, because suddenly, as statisticians, as data scientists, you spend our users, you're more familiar with a lot of computational logic, and so integration with the JavaScript ecosystem and making it simpler allows these users to suddenly create interactive reports and interactive visualizations, which allows them to communicate with the decision makers in a much better way. So in many ways, I think, in short, if I was to say what's the single biggest advantage of this development, well, I think it helps data scientists and our users to communicate whatever they're working on in a much better way, and essentially helps them create more value, because otherwise things were getting lost in a static report, maybe a regression table with a bunch of coefficients which no one is going to even see. But now suddenly you have these really cool web apps with interactive stuff which draws attention. So I think that's essentially what this integration with JavaScript has done, and the way it's been developing, I only see it happen more and more. More people are getting into it. More R users are trying to learn JavaScript so they can contribute back with interesting widgets. And this is a very healthy happening in my view.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely see. I think from myself as a Shiny developer and an R programmer, when you have sort of like your stakeholders and your head business people, and they look to you and they say, well, we know of Shiny, we know of all these direct visualizations. They start thinking, do we need a statistician or do we need a software developer? And I've sort of seen that it sort of gets really confusing for them to understand that concept. But I think as the more people talk about Shiny and the easeability, and also showing them the visualizations and what you can do and the static to dynamic aspect, I think it will definitely help push more involvement for analysts and scientists to create those applications without having the people getting confused about, you're creating this web app, but do you need to have these types of skills? You need to have this. And I think that's, especially with HTML widget, it really integrates all of that really nicely, and it really makes it easier, which is, I think, the end goal. Nobody wants anybody to struggle and have a hard time developing things. So that's really great, and it's awesome.
Yeah, I agree. I think you hit it on the nail when you said that it allows analysts to express themselves in ways which they were not able to do earlier, right? So be able to produce software that would typically be something that only a web developer could do, right? Mm-hmm. And the parallels I'm seeing is with Wall Street, where I think in the past, Wall Street, the model used to be there would be a modeler, there would be a trader, and there would be a developer. And the idea is the modeler would be the math stats guy, the developer would essentially implement that logic in software, and the trader would be the one who's going to execute. But I mean, over the years, Wall Street's moved to the model where the opportunity is really short, so you need a guy who can do all three, right? And I think that's exactly what's happening with data science. So you need a guy who has the stats background, who can essentially express code, write software, which is where R comes in, but also be able to create end products that can then be passed along higher up in the management. So I think all these tools essentially have helped the data scientist play that role, just like how Wall Street has this integrated trader these days.
I think I will steal Ted's other question because they're really well written and very well thought out. So in R and JavaScript, what are some of the challenges you see when trying to integrate them? Sort of like the subtle nuances between sort of the statistical language with sort of the language of the web. You can talk about that in regards to HTML widgets in general.
So first of all, I would actually say that R and JavaScript actually have a lot of commonalities in terms of how they work. So in fact, if there were two languages that were kind of made for each other, I would really say that R and JavaScript belong to that category. A lot of the syntax, the way you write functions, both languages promote a very healthy functional programming paradigm. So I think those are the things that really work very well with the R JavaScript integration. Now in terms of challenges, so the biggest challenge I think is in terms of like coming up with a consistent way to develop these integrations, and I've tried kind of building tools that allow people to do that. But what I'm kind of leaning towards here is that, so when you're doing R and JavaScript integration, essentially there are lots of errors, lots of bugs that can creep in, especially because you can have errors on the JavaScript side, you can have errors on the R side. So debugging becomes really a problem, and that I've heard that commonly across people, like, hey, I tried this, it doesn't work, I don't know what's going on, right? So in my mind, that's, I think, the biggest problem in terms of trying to do this, integrated development. Having said that, there are ways to kind of get over that, and usually my philosophy of development there is like, okay, just live in the world of JavaScript, make sure that you're able to, at the end of the day, I'm trying to oversimplify this, but the idea is, okay, can I come up with a simple function, encapsulate everything where the function says, okay, if I give this JavaScript function these variables, x1, x2, x3, x4, this is the output it's going to create. Test that, make sure that with these values, it's going to give you the correct output, right? And then on the R side, you only need to worry about, hey, is my R function giving the JavaScript function these variables in the format that it needs, right? And so I think that clean separation is kind of helps a lot, but that's not a natural way to kind of think about a lot of these things, and that's the biggest challenge in my mind. Of course, the other challenges with JavaScript, JavaScript is not a very well designed language, so I mean, you'll see people ranting about JavaScript just like the way people rant about R, so another commonality. But the good parts of JavaScript are really good. So I think the other issue is coming up with, okay, what's the good parts of JavaScript, understanding that, understanding asynchronous events. So I mean, in R, everything happens in a synchronous fashion. In JavaScript, you could have asynchronous things happening, and so understanding of that, I would say, creates a little bit of issue. But net, I mean, I think the learning curve is a reasonable one. The data structures map very cleanly between R and JavaScript, so you could express everything as JSON. So the mapping is really clean. So there are definitely lots of things going in favor of development, and I'm sure with more tools coming out that help people do kind of live coding, especially, will really help bridge this gap and getting more people to develop interesting R JavaScript packages.
Yeah, so one of the things I guess I'd like to just sort of follow up on your answer to this question is one of the things that I've experienced in my somewhat limited use cases of using R and JavaScript together is that it was tough to recreate reproducible workflows for some use cases. There were times where I found myself, excuse me, where I could, say, use RMaps or something else to generate the map that I was looking for, but to get it sort of work right and give it the sort of the little visual tweaks I wanted, it was kind of like, okay, now I've used R to generate 99% of the JavaScript I want, and then I have to go back in and I have to like tweak this 1%. And it's great if I'm doing this once, but if it's something I want to reproduce or rerun, I kind of have to remember what it is that I'm doing. So I guess you're trying to bridge this gap between something that's simple and easily reproducible and then something where you can give users a lot of power to tweak. And I guess my question is, how do you find that right balance so there isn't a lot of, you can allow people to encode customizations and minimize this kind of after file generation tweaking and facilitate these more reproducible workflows and giving people really a lot of control?
Okay, so this is an excellent question. So, yeah, so let me try to answer this in a couple of pieces, right? So first of all, so whenever you move up the chain of abstraction, right, trying to abstract things out where the user has to just do a few things, right, you lose a lot of flexibility, right? I mean, that's something that everyone understands. Best example I would give is D3, right? So writing a simple bar plot in D3 would take you, I mean, maybe around 60, 70 lines of code. Whereas in R, I mean, you can just write a single line of code and create a bar chart, right? But I think what people need to understand is, yeah, D3 is that way because D3 gives you the flexibility to sort of really, I mean, change every single piece of your DOM and pretty much make it dance to your tunes, right? So now, where am I leading to with this, right? So coming to the question that you just raised, so the fact that as you abstract things more, you lose some flexibility is kind of a known fact. So the question then is, how do you kind of make things abstract, but at the same time let people have that extra bit to customize? Now there are a few ways to do that, right? So one way to do that is of course, I mean, we are heavily dependent on the JavaScript library APIs. So if something is not being exposed by that particular library, so a good example is like, say, the NVD3 library. You draw line charts, and I think one of the commonly asked requests was like, okay, hey, can I add a vertical line at some place, right? It's pretty easy in R. I mean, you just write extra line of code and you're done, right? Whereas in JavaScript, to do that, you need to understand how the NVD3 library works. You need to understand the internals of that, right? So, I mean, there are a couple of ways of doing that. One way is, of course, providing hooks into the object created. So if I have a hook to the NVD3 object, then I can write custom JavaScript code that will manipulate that object. And then, of course, the R side provides a mechanism so that you can just pass it extra JavaScript code as a function and let it directly operate on the object rather than this post tweak that you're talking about, right? Because reproducibility was your question, and I think being able to have a hook to that object, manipulating it, from the R side by passing along a JavaScript function is one way to do it. The other way is, of course, manipulating the JavaScript library itself, right? And that's, and that really depends on the flexibility of the library that you're programming with. Some libraries allow plugins, so you could contribute plugins that would again make their way back into R, but it's not a simple problem to solve. It's not a simple problem to solve. In fact, that is a limitation of how this whole world of our JavaScript works. And you hit it on the nail when you said, 99% you get without any efforts. That extra 1% makes you dance to your tunes. And it is true so much so that, like in my current job, I do a lot of custom visualization development. And as much as I would just like to stick to HTML widgets, I'm like, you know what? Writing 99% of the code with one line of code and then writing another 200 lines of code to customize, I might as well just rewrite the whole thing in JavaScript, which would be a lot shorter, right? So I think what I'm trying to get here is that for custom stuff, you need to know JavaScript to kind of expand on it. The idea of HTML widgets is not to kind of take that pain away, because there's no way we can do that, right? So the idea is, like, for the 99% of the work that you need to do, this is a simple 1 line, 2 lines of code that you can use. So that was a kind of a long-winded answer, but I think, in short, I think I'm trying to say 2 things. One, yeah, it is a genuine pain point, and there is no generic way to solve it because you are at the mercy of the JavaScript library that's underlying. 2, the couple of things that package authors can do to make it easy is to provide hooks into the JavaScript object so that if I know JavaScript, I can do the manipulations, and I have that hook. And 3, I would say, is use libraries that have well-designed APIs so that you can take advantage of the first 2.
Great. So we have only a few minutes left to wrap up the interview, so I wanted to touch on Shiny, since that's a big component of the main episode that this interview will be attached to. And I guess my question is, how do you see Shiny and all of these JavaScript packages that you've written and other JavaScript packages and HTML widgets interacting with each other? What is sort of the future that you see for those, and do they complement each other, or do you see them as alternatives for sort of doing the same thing?
Excellent question. So I think I see a development of a lot of these things as being highly complementary to each other. So and I think to understand this, it's important to kind of go back to when Shiny actually started, right? When Shiny actually started, it was a web framework that allowed people to do reactive programming, right, with simple code. But interactivity in Shiny was actually what I would call more reactive, where you change a drop-down and you suddenly replaced one image with another, right? So it's not interactive the way you would define interactivity in a traditional JavaScript kind of a sense, right? But the reason I bring this up is essentially what's happened over time now is that, like, with a lot more JavaScript packages being made available in R, it was about natural to take advantage of these packages inside of Shiny. So a good example I can give you is, for example, the leaflet package that was written by Joe and Yui. So that package allows you to kind of create client-side visualizations, something you could just put it in HTML and send it out to somebody, right? And at the same time also allows you to hook it back to Shiny so that you can make it a part of the app, right? And pretty much with HTML widgets, in fact, if you write a widget, you automatically get those bindings. So you can use the same thing on just a purely client-side environment, and you can use it inside Shiny as well, right? Now, a couple of interesting developments happening, and I'm working on a few of them. So one is, a lot of times you have these HTML widgets, and let's say you want them to interact with each other. So I have a bar plot, I have a scatter plot, I want the bar plot to talk to the scatter plot, right? Now, the natural way of doing it currently is to use Shiny, and it's the way you're interacting is you're making Shiny communicate. So the bar plot tells Shiny, hey, something changed. The Shiny tells the scatter plot, something has changed, please update, right? But if both of them are on the client side, natural question is, why can't we just let them talk to each other directly, right? So, so I've been working on some projects where you can do this sort of thing directly on the client side, right? And the advantage of that is then you can embed these in documents and and just email them to somebody without having to put it on a server and then run a full-fledged web app, right? So where I see things going forward is that I mean, a very tight integration with Shiny and all these JavaScript libraries where you as a user get to clearly define where you want the interactivity to lie. Do you want the interactivity, is it easier to express a particular interactive action computation from the server? So for example, let's say on a particular dropdown being changed, you want the k-means algorithm to run, right? It is easier done on the Shiny side. So you want this to be returned back to the server and server communicates back. But let's say you're hovering on top of a point and you want to see the tooltip. I mean, it's a lot less latency if it's on the client side, right? So what I'm saying here is that the entire ecosystem in my mind is going to move towards a place where you can clearly define the interactivity as client side versus server side, and essentially then get the best of both worlds, where you're able to use, I mean, our server to compute things which are done much easier, but at the same time let the browser do what it does best in terms of cutting down latency. Right? No one wants to hover over a point and wait for like a few seconds for it to display the tooltip, right? Which could happen if your server is the one that's returning back the data. So again, long answer short, I think the ecosystem is moving in a very healthy direction that complements each other, and I really see them as a tight-knit set of tools that are advancing the integration in a consistent direction, as opposed to fragmenting the environment and having multiple sets of things happen.
Awesome. So I don't think I have. Actually, I do have one more question for you, Ramnath, which is that a Run DMC sweatshirt you're wearing?
Is that what?
Is it a Run DMC sweatshirt you're wearing?
No. This is so I belong to a team in Alteryx called Content Engineering, and this is a custom, I would say, sweatshirt, yeah, or a custom hoodie made for the team, yeah.
But the logo, it is a play on the old Run DMC logo.
Oh yeah, that's possible. That's possible. I wasn't aware of that.
I just saw the one red bar and I was like, is that a Run DMC sweatshirt?
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome. Great. So I don't have any more questions. I don't know about you, Jasmine.
I'm all set now. I got a lot of really interesting information, and it was awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, so thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to do the interview with us, Ramnath. It was really enlightening and really interesting.
Great, thanks, and thanks for having me. Really enjoyed talking, and yeah, cool.
Awesome. All right, well, thanks again, and I'm sure we'll talk soon.
Perfect. Great.
All right. Bye.
See you guys. Bye.